The dark night enveloped the mountain area, illuminating it with bright, beautiful stars shining in the dark, endless sky and lighting the way for those who were still awake. In the middle of the dark forest, in a small clearing around a campfire, the four heroes were resting, discussing their achievements. During this time, they would prepare a pottage to eat after the long journey. After putting all their things in one place, they talked about how great it would be when their journey was over and the final battle went well. After all, then they will have the opportunity to do what they want. One of the heroes, Alto, asked what his friends were planning to do when it was all over. Across from Alto sat a young red-haired girl in a hat who was listening intently. Her name was Dorothy. She was a mage and replied that after the battle, she would like to devote all her time to studying magic. Sitting next to him, a strong and well-muscled warrior, Rayan, replied that he had left his family and was now very bored and worried, so he would just return to their home. Another guy named Roy, who played the role of assassin in the squad, with a sly and cheeky grin, holding a glass in his hands, asked what Alto himself wanted to do Alto. The boy scratched the back of his head, which was covered with wheat-colored silky hair, and thought, not knowing what to say, so he said that he didn't even know yet, because he still didn't understand what he really wanted to do in this life. But Roy just grinned, not believing Alto's words because he's rich and popular right now. Doesn't he really want anything? Dorothy pointed accusingly at Roy, saying that he didn't think what he was saying. Then I heard the voice of Ryan, who, finishing his drink, suggested that Alto start his own family, as this can really change his life a lot. At that moment, everyone fell silent and stared at Ryan with huge, surprised eyes, as if he had said something stupid. Then Dorothy chuckled and asked if Ryan was married himself, and Roy teased me, saying he hoped it wasn't on a female gorilla. Ryan got angry and told his friends to stop making jokes. But the noise interrupted Alto, who really decided to think about this question, even though he already knew the answer. He said that he wanted to marry someone with whom he could fall in love at first sight, and thus learn what love is. Moreover, as he sat by the fire and watched the shooting stars, Alto was sure that this would happen if only it was possible. However, after defeating Ned the Demon Lord, it would be difficult. But that wasn't what they needed to think about right now, because a couple of hours later, they were on their way to the Demon Lord's castle. The fight started spontaneously. The heroes penetrated to the very depths of the castle and found the Lord, who was already ready to defend himself, raising a huge, sharp weapon similar to a toror. He flew straight at Alto, but the latter managed to defend himself with his sword just in time, causing a loud sound of blades clashing. The master attacked from the air, flying on his devil wings, but Alto still parried his blows. He held on with all his strength to prevent the Demon Lord from defeating him and restrained his strength. But then the master stretched out his leg, thus directing his blow directly at the person who would not expect such a blow. The attack succeeded, and Alto was sent flying a long distance away by the force of the blow. But this did not knock him down, and the hero, having rolled on the ground, was already ready for the next attack. Then Altoa's strong hand touched Alto's back. He knew immediately that this was his trusted ally, Ryan. Just like the rest of the team, they were the best of the best, which was why they were now preparing to fight back against the Demon Lord. Dorothy, Roy, Ryan, and Alto all had the same goal, to destroy the master, but the opponent was too serious. Dorothy then turned to Alto, who immediately turned around and handed him a small magic ball. Roy added that this can be used for emergency rescues. Alto, putting the ball in his pocket, realized that it was a moving object and thanked Dorothy. But there was no time to think too long. Turning his head, Alto saw what he expected. Their enemy was already here, so you need to gather all your strength and go all out to defeat him. After flexing his fists, Ryan excitedly said that it was time to get down to business and was already ready to attack. Then, after shouting out that he was counting on his team, Ryan was the first to rush towards the Demon Lord, approaching him at high speed. The hero immediately activated the Roaring Flame Fist, which could allow him to land a strong punch. A bright yellow glow appeared around them, and a magic circle formed below, which was where Ryan's strike was aimed Ryana. But the Demon Lord wasn't so stupid. He knew that the vibration that went through the ground could cause damage, so he reacted immediately. Ryan swore angrily as the demon leaped away, realizing that he couldn't even hit it. But the Demon Lord had already found a new target in the form of the Swarm Killer and swiftly flew towards him. Roy lazily replied that the demon was too boring, so Tom would have to deal with it as well, and then used his Poison Fang ability while holding purple spikes in his hands. After that, the swarm lashed out at the Demon Lord, aggressively throwing blow after blow. But the Overlord dodged each of the boys' swift blows, as if toying with him. Then he abruptly grabbed Roy's hand that was holding the blade, holding it effortlessly, thus stopping the blow. With a swing, the Demon Lord wanted to push Roy aside, but the warrior Ryan immediately appeared behind him. Ryan. He wanted to hold down Roy, who was flying straight at him with his back so that he could stay on his feet. But the Demon Lord's blow was so strong that both heroes were instantly thrown back into the stone wall, which cracked under the strain. Alto watched intently. Alto. Dorothy suddenly appeared and pointed her magic staff at the demon, saying that she would not let it escape. Noticing this, the Demon Lord began to observe the girl, but did not notice how Vilazit small, flexible twigs began to climb out of the ground. In the blink of an eye, through the use of the power of nature, Dorothy caused the growth of magic vines that enveloped the demon's body, restricting its movements. The demon tried to raise its huge axe, but the vines had already immobilized it, leaving it exposed and helpless. Tired, Roy, Ryan, and Dorothy all shouted at Alto that it was his turn to attack. Raising his sword, a breathless Alto shouted to the demon that he was finished and launched an attack. But it wasn't directed by a demon. Using the ability to maximize his magical powers, Alto created a powerful energy around him. It caused the stones under their feet to crack and fall, forming large cracks on the stone surface. The Demon Lord had no choice but to watch what would happen next, even though it was clear that he was finished. Hero Alto's gaze became fast, focused, and almost insane from the fact that he was using such a colossal amount of energy. Summoning all his energy, Alto raised the glowing sword above his head using the lightning flash ability. And then, with all his strength, he brought down this Mii, hitting the ground with it so that he could release all the energy in the direction of the Demon Lord by inertia. Sela Alto's power and punch were so great that it hit the Demon Lord's defensive field, which he was still trying to protect himself with. But the demon's shield was easily broken through, dealing a huge amount of damage, after which all the rest of the energy was directed at the enemy. The beam of energy was so powerful that it broke through the castle wall, shooting out and illuminating everything for a long distance. So large that the beam was able to pierce even the dark haze of clouds that had gathered around the castle, allowing the sun's rays to penetrate the Demon Lord's abode. But soon, the energy began to fade, which meant that the battle had come to its logical conclusion. The castle was partially destroyed, the wall was breached, and the floor was left with a hollow with ruins, at the edge of which stood an exhausted Alto, and on the ruins themselves, under the rays of the sun, lay the Demon Lord himself. Turning to look at his friends, Alto breathed a sigh of relief when he realized that he had succeeded. Lying on the ruins, the Demon Lord suddenly said that it was painful, and then praised the hero who had done this to him, saying that he had done well. Then the demon admitted that the hero won, so let him kill him, because that's what he came for. Leaning tiredly on his sword, Alto thought that it had been a long time, but now this battle was finally over. He also, Alto, knew that he was able to get this far because he had more talent for fighting than others. Moreover, he was ordered to save humanity and did it, but deep down, he still felt dissatisfied. Standing over the Demon Lord, Alto decided that after completing this mission, he wanted to end the hero label. And this is in order to find something that can awaken real emotions in him. But then the Demon Lord's helmet seemed to evaporate, disintegrating into pieces. Alto hadn't expected this, so he stared at the demon's face. It opened more and more, as if throwing off a shell or mask. In the end, it became clear that the face has more feminine features. So it turned out that the Demon Lord was a beautiful red-haired girl with horns, who, still admitting defeat and lying helplessly on the ruins, told Alto to kill her. Her eyes were wet with tears, and it was clear that she was really afraid and didn't want to die, but she knew it was inevitable. Ruki Alto's hands, which were holding the sword, suddenly relaxed and almost trembled in surprise. And then the sword fell to the ground as he couldn't think of anything else but the girl opposite. He pointed a surprised finger at her, as if trying to prove to himself that what he was seeing was true. He froze as he stood in front of the Demon Lord, not knowing what he was feeling or what to do next. Alto stared straight into her eyes and couldn't understand the feeling that enveloped his head and chest, which began to ache in the area of the heart. He pulled away from her, almost immediately experiencing something he hadn't experienced before. It felt like fear, or worse, but it felt good. He clutched at his chest, trying to control the pounding of his heart and the heat all over his body that instantly enveloped him. Demon, who was about to die, opened one eye slightly, staring blankly at the hero. Ryan immediately turned to Alto, asking what was wrong with him while Dorothy was healing Roy's wounds. But Alto couldn't answer. He stared at the floor and blushed as if he were ashamed of himself. In the next instant, he shouted out to his friends in a frightened voice that he did not know what was happening to him, which surprised and frightened them. Alto added that he didn't know why, but his chest was starting to hurt a lot. Roy immediately said angrily that it must be a mental spell and it could be dangerous. Roy immediately eased Dorothy to heal Alto immediately and remove the spell, but the girl replied that she was already trying so hard, directing the autoflow of healing magic to Alto. Looking at this strange scene, the red-haired Demon Lord even stood up to see what was going on. Then Roy took his sharp blade, told Alto to rest for a while, and went to the demon himself. She immediately tensed, knowing that this time she would definitely not escape death. Standing in front of the she-devil and raising his blades, Roy said that he would get her head for all of them. The she-devil only snorted angrily and turned her head away as if annoyed by his loud words. Dorothy, who had been healing Alto all this time, didn't notice that the guy had been standing still all this time. All this time he had been pondering the strange feeling that had come over him. Roy had already raised his blade over the she-devil to destroy the evil enemy. But then someone knocked the blade out of his hands and it spun and flew away. Etasdiel Alto did this with his sword, standing between the girl and Roy, pushing his friend away from her. Roy's blade bounced off and buried itself in the ground nearby while Alto was still threatening his friend with his sword. Roy immediately indignantly asked Alto what he was doing, not understanding the motive of his actions. But Alto stood his ground with a stony face and a sword in his hands, protecting the demon lord who was covering his face. Dorothy and Ryan were looking at Alto with the same question in their eyes as Roy, and even the demoness. Extending her hand towards Alto, she asked what this hero was doing, also not understanding his intentions. Demonitza, the evil demoness, said through gritted teeth that the guy should not dare to flirt with her because it would be an insult to those who risked their lives or died in battles. But Alto calmly and confidently replied that he didn't even have such intentions in mind, and looked at the girl. She gave an even angrier and more displeased look, and tears of hatred welled up in her eyes. But when Alto looked at her, he started to blush profusely and felt incredibly uncomfortable, looking straight into the eyes of the frustrated demoness. And in the next instant, the guy recoiled and took a couple of steps back, shouting in embarrassment, and thereby surprised the girl with his reaction. Alto jumped away from her so hard that his back hit the stone wall, which then cracked. The impact made Alto cough a little, and when the coughing stopped, he noticed that there was a dead silence around him and everyone was looking at him. With his head bowed and his teeth clenched, Alto tried to figure out what was going on. Couldn't he face the she-devil? And then Alto clutched at his heart again, still not sure why it was beating so hard. It didn't seem normal. Roy immediately pointed to Dorothy and said that Dorothy had promised to cure Alto, but apparently she hadn't, since the heart symptoms were recurring. Dorothy pointed a finger at herself thoughtfully. Ryan and the other characters watched. And then, scratching her head, the girl said in a puzzled voice that there was no spell on Alto. Everyone around them was surprised again and looked in Dorothy's direction in surprise, trying to process her words. Toot Ryan scratched his chin thoughtfully and decided to suggest that maybe Alto was just falling in love with the demon lord. This news also shocked the she-devil herself, who gave a disdainful and arrogant look that asked what nonsense they were all talking about. And then the girl even looked at Alto with a little surprise and even a little disdain. Alto. But as soon as the guy caught her eye, he blushed sharply again, embarrassed and covering his mouth with his hand. He felt very strange emotions. This is probably what love is all about. Dorothy's mouth dropped open in surprise as she realized the whole situation, and Ryan slapped his hand on his forehead in frustration and exhaustion, wondering what to do next. Roy would also be looking at his friend Alto in shock and surprise Alto. But what was most surprised was the demon lord, who made such a grimace of shock that it was clear that she didn't like it. The silence lasted for a few seconds, and then sounds of surprise and indignation echoed throughout the castle, or rather, what was left of it. Alto, aware of the feeling of love at dawn, thought about how his heart was beating, but at the same time he felt happy and how these unspeakable and first feelings overwhelmed him. Afterward, as he sat by the rock and raised his hand up, Alto realized what love was and felt his heart leap violently. The hero's friends and the winged demon lord looked at the thoughtful Alto very strangely. Warrior Rayen, holding his head with his right hand, could not understand what was going on, and at that moment he realized, He said it was really love, and Roy added that he understood because you can't tell your feelings, but this is not the time for jokes at all. Dorothy, looking at Alto and listening to Ryan and Roy, suddenly came to a conclusion. Declaring with a bright smile, she said that Alto fell in love with the wrong girl because Dorothy herself should be better. Ryan and Roy both rolled their eyes at Dorothy's words, and Dorothy continued to be happy as she was. Ryan and Roy immediately had the same idea, and they swung their swords loudly and shouted for Dorothy to be quiet. Ryan asked Alto to listen to him, coughing as he did so, and take a closer look at the demon lord. Ryan was standing very steady as he spoke, gesturing for Alto to listen carefully, and he did. Warrior Rain continued to speak, describing the demon lord's bestial eyes, hideous horns and sharp fangs, as well as large wings, and how it wasn't a human at all, but a god-defying demon. Alto, wondering what love meant, wondered how he wanted to be with someone who wasn't even human. And also, as he thought about it, he looked at the frowning and distant demon lord with warmth in his eyes. The demon lord, noticing how long Alto was looking at her Alto, looked back at him indignantly, and the hero looked down in confusion and shyness. But after a moment, he raised his head thoughtfully, pretending that he wasn't looking at anything, and was just thinking. Alto, still thinking about the demon lord and what Ryan had said, pictured himself with her and said it was quite intriguing. Roy said it was a dead end for Alto, and Dorothy told Ryan that his blunt nature was not working right here. The exasperated demon lord, physically closing her eyes and turning away, said that Altoshi was extremely uncomfortable with Alto's gaze and didn't know why, but she was afraid for her life. Alto held his head, explaining that he was just being honest and that wasn't what he meant, and also asking her to pretend that she hadn't heard. Explaining his words, Alto approached the demon lord, and she, continuing to block him, only shouted at him to get away from her. And then, glaring aggressively at Alto, she added loudly and with a shout that she would rather die than be with him. The Alto, who was annoyed at hearing these words, was dumbfounded on the spot and did not know what to do. Then the hero, surrendering to unpleasant words, humiliatingly fell to his knees, putting his hands on the ground. Also, dumbfounded and with horror in his eyes, Alto said that in all his grueling fights, it was the first time he had received such damage. Then, with an even more confused look on his face, he mumbled that this was a natural reaction if they were enemies, but he still thought about it uncomprehendingly. And Alto's friends, looking at all his incomprehensible actions, looked at him with a detached and questioning look. Alto looked at his friends and asked them if it was so bad when a hero falls in love with a demon lord, and they told him that he noticed too late. The demon lord screamed in frustration about how humiliating it was to lose to these fools and was speechless with horror, and Alto shouted back that it wasn't necessary to take it so lightly because he was absolutely serious. The two friends continued to look at the situation, and Dorothy asked where the previous tension had gone. Rayan was holding his head with his left hand, sweat dripping on his face, thinking hard. He remembered them coming home from their camping trips and being greeted by a large crowd of people who always praised Alto. And contrary to what the world thinks of his appearance, he is a ruthless hero who has buried many demons. He is not interested in wealth or fame, and whatever he does, he cannot satisfy his heart. Tagja, Rayan also remembered very well how bitter and sad Alto's face had Alto been, but now it was so animated. Rayan and Dorothy just stood there, looking at the lovesick Alto and wondering how it was possible. At this time, Roy, taking out his purple blade from the ground, said that no, it doesn't matter. Alto looked back at Roy with confusion and excitement and just let out a sigh, and Roy was already in a fighting stance and apologizing to Alto that he would have to ask him to give up his love. Alto just stared blankly at Roy, who told him that Alto didn't understand, because it was just a fleeting love affair. A moment later, Roy's blade is already very close to Alto's terrified face. Pinning Alto to the rock and driving the blade into his head, Roy said that he would never let all their efforts go to waste. Rayan, seeing the whole scene, shouted at Roy to see what he was doing, and Dorothy just looked on excitedly. Roy, still pinning Alto to the rock, asked his friends if they didn't think the same since they were one step away from defeating the demon lord. Rayan, his hand clenched into a fist, and Dorothy seemed to be thinking rather excitedly about Roy's words. And Dorothy, scratching her head, even added how quickly things had changed. Roy asked Alto to think about it, bloodlust in his eyes, and pulled the blade toward him. The friends and the demon lord just watched, and Roy went on and told Alto to remember his duty as a hero right now. Roy drew blood as he continued to press down on Alto with his blade, and the blood slowly dripped onto the ground between them. Roy was still pausing, and his blade was pressing hard against Alto's neck, who was also standing there not knowing what to do. And Roy, still pressing his friend, added that he would take not only the head of the demon lord, but also the head of Alto. The atmosphere in the castle, although it looked calm from the outside, was becoming increasingly tense inside. Dorothy and Rayan watched in silence, staring at the two friends' quarrel. The Overlord had long since lost interest in the situation. As Kay wasn't interested in the internal squabbles in the team, she just wanted to know what would happen to her next. But everyone was always looking at Roy, who was pinning Alto to the wall and holding a blade to his throat. Aggressive Roy decided to bring Alto to his senses and asked him to remind him again who is the hero. And then he said that the answer is actually very simple, because all heroes know what they are fighting for. Lowering his head in annoyance, Alto felt the blade of the blade sink lightly into his skin, leaving a cut. He remembered who the hero was. The hero helps the weak, hinders the strong, and stands firm in his beliefs. But there was one caveat. This definition did not fit Alto. He was originally different from everyone else. Ever since he was a child, his first memory was of flies and the stench of the city's alleyways. He was lying on the floor, almost senseless, and couldn't do anything on his own, so he just didn't move. He was just a kid, but all around him were garbage, flies, and street rats that bit Alto, seeing him as their dead prey. There were rats everywhere in this garbage dump, feeding on garbage and dirt, among which lay a small boy. Whether his parents abandoned him or he lost them during the Demon War, the boy couldn't remember exactly. And the stinking garbage dump with the rats was the earliest memory Alto could remember, and even then he was thinking about death. Then he heard the clatter of hooves beside him. It was a royal soldier who had noticed a child lying in a muddy alley. The guardsman immediately noticed the boy and asked if he was all right, but Alto didn't answer. He was completely exhausted, but then he heard shouts that someone had noticed that the boy was still breathing and an offer to help him. But then, for better or worse, Alto was taken into the kingdom's custody and sent to a local shelter. He was taken to a place where there were many children who were like him in their life situation. It was where children who didn't have relatives were taken, just like Alto. All of them were devoid of hope and joy that couldn't be seen in their eyes. Now Alto understands what it's like to be there. Especially at this time, the kingdom was waging a war with the demons and could lose. The kingdom's army was in dire need of heroes, and the king decided to increase their number by creating new fighters. Perhaps the shelter that Alto went to was created for one thing only, and this is not a help for orphans, but a way to find real heroes. Boys and girls fought each other in life and death training battles. Initially, Alto was weak and couldn't fend off peer attacks. There was only fear in his eyes from what was happening around him, and the boy didn't have time to react, but they continued to be taught the art of combat through hard training. Alto was getting a lot of injuries, but there was no time to rest, as they also had educational classes where they had to read and study a lot. Fatigue often took its toll, and sometimes you just wanted to put down the book and close your eyes to rest a little. But as soon as you were even a little distracted, the matron immediately appeared next to you, holding a whip in her hand. The whip immediately flew up and at a huge angle flew directly on the back, head, or any other parts of the body of the irradiated person. Then as luck would have it, the pain from the blow was unbearable, and I really didn't want to sleep anymore. In this way, orphans were literally drummed into the knowledge of magic without the right to sleep. Probably the only thing a battered and tired orphan can wish for is a good dinner. But they were fed the usual scraps of rotten fruit and pieces of stale bread with a bone. He definitely couldn't eat enough of it. Looking down at his lunch, Alto knew this very well, but he had no choice but to eat the slop. Even they were delicious because of the long lack of food and sleep, and the boy ate every last thing that came across in his plate. The most annoying thing was that there were always those who ate good food, and who were even lucky enough to eat delicious smelling meat. But these were only the few who achieved good results, and of the food was as a reward, and those who did not keep up and got in the way were mercilessly destroyed in extreme conditions, burying children behind the shelter where enough tombstones had already accumulated. There was no place for good and ethics, only fear and survival instinct, which made Alto go all the way. He realized that in order to survive here, you need to kill and become strong. Later, Alto wondered if he had a heart at that time, and most likely not, because any feelings could drive him to death. In the end, he was able to break out in the lead, grow into the strongest warrior, and appear before the king with other heroes who became his team. Alto, Roy, Ryan, and Dorothy were given the honor of becoming a group of heroes and given the ultimate challenge: defeat the demon lord. And during all their journeys, Alto had been happy to see the free world he was seeing for the first time, without wardens or other warriors eager to destroy it. He also found comrades in battle that he could trust with his life because they became a great team and good friends. Alto thought and felt that having fulfilled the duties of a hero, he should definitely be rewarded for all his hard work, and for this he continued to fight. But when he thought about it, he always thought of the conversation he'd had with his friends at the local tavern, and it was disconcerting. Alto then asked his friends why they were all going on this trip, not just for the sake of defeating the main enemy. At first, the friends did not understand the question, because in different places they announced the recruitment of heroes, so they came, showing their strength. Ryan replied that he would like to learn the warrior's way, as he felt that now was the best time to train and increase his strength. Dorothy replied that she was here because she could study magic. She was very encouraged by the search for valuable literature, which had a pioneering spirit. Then the mug of the most adventurous member of the team, Roy, hit the table hard and confidently. The guy replied with a smirk that after defeating the demon lord, he would be able to get enough money to last him for his entire life, and there was no way he could miss this chance. Alto, listening to Roy, was surprised that there were people with such selfish goals. Ryan agreed with his friend, saying that he hadn't expected Roy to do this. But Roy just laughed and said, "Do the guys really have a problem with this? Because he didn't see anything wrong with being true to your desires regarding alcohol, money, and women." Alto's friends really had different goals, but Alto felt like he was out of place at this table for a moment, because his intentions were very different from the thoughts of his friends. He suddenly realized that he wasn't like everyone else. After all, the dreams he wanted to fulfill were so small that he didn't even have a reason to fight for them, let alone the unwavering conviction that would make him a hero. Alto knew that he had nothing, and that he was like a puppet in the hands of someone with a void inside. That's why the guy wants to finally cling to at least something that is eternal, and that can be his true desire. And now, seeing the demon lord in front of him, it was as if his heart was beating again, and his long-forgotten feelings were awakened. She had awakened something in him that he had long forgotten, and was finally able to feel something warm and pleasant inside, like a ray of light in a gaping void. Pinning Alto to the wall, Roy said angrily that he hadn't thought that falling in love would make him do something so stupid, or that his instincts might be so attracted to him. But Alto was determined that even if it contradicted the hero's actions, he still didn't want to give up his feeling. With a scornful look, Roy rhetorically asked his friend if he really didn't want to give up. What's on his mind then? Alto gathered the golden bundle of energy in his hand and confidently replied that no matter what, he would break through. Then, at great speed, he launched the energy directly at the swarm. The blow was very strong, and the guy couldn't stand it. Under the surprised stares of Dorothy and Ryan, Roy, helpless and not expecting such a reaction from his friend, flew further and further away under the force of the blow. When the guy tried to land on his feet, his foot slipped and he lost his balance. However, Ryan and Dorothy caught him. The girl immediately started using her power to heal Roy, and Ryan started asking if he was okay, but all Roy cared about right now was that stupid Alto had hit him. The demon lord looked at all this with pleasure, and supporting the fight said that it was good, and it was better for all the heroes to kill each other. But then the bishop was addressed by Alto, who ran up at high speed and barely slowed Alto down. The she-devil looked at him questioningly and asked him what he wanted from her. Alto froze at that moment and closed his eyes, as if he was very uncomfortable, and his expression instantly became serious. Stammering and holding out her hands to the girl, Alto awkwardly begged her forgiveness, blushing red. But the she-devil shut herself away from him in disgust and screamed at the pervert not to touch her. But Alto went up to the she-devil, begged her not to be so cruel, and held out his hands in her direction. And then he picked up the girl, who gave Alto an indignant and displeased look, trying to pull away from him and grabbing her hair. But the guy was determined that the two of them would get out of here. Looking at Alto, who had decided to save the demon lord they had been fighting for so long, Roy, Dorothy, and Ryan were all shocked. But Alto just silently turned away from his friends, choosing not to look at their surprised stares. And then, in an instant, he took off running towards the big cliff. Alto was already at the edge of a high chasm, and when he reached the end of it, he jumped straight down. The she-devil screamed out loud in fear, not understanding what Alto was up to, but the prospect of falling from a great height and being broken didn't suit her. But in the hero's eyes, half closed due to the wind, there was not a drop of fear, and he quickly fell down, tightly holding the girl in his arms. Up above, the heroes, looking at Alto, did not understand what he was thinking. Dorothy, the wounded Roy, and Ryan, who was helping him stand Ryan, looked down in surprise. The she-devil was still screaming in fear, yelling at Alto that he had gone completely mad, but the guy replied that this was not the case at all. Then he took out of his pocket the same round ball that Dorothy had given him in case of an emergency. Still falling rapidly, Alto told the girl that he had something to move around with. The couple had already fallen too low for the rest of the heroes to see it clearly, but suddenly they noticed a strange glow behind the clouds below. Dorothy guessed at once that the light was due to the very object she had given Alto in case of an emergency. As he fell, struggling against the air resistance, Alto looked up at his boys and quietly apologized to them, while the she-devil was already surreptitiously pulling her cunning hands towards the ball to move. Feeling the round object slip from his hands, Alto looked down and looked questioningly at the she-devil. The girl fairly shouted out that now, even so, the hero will come to an end, even if she dies with him. Alto shouted to the she-devil not to touch the balloon. He didn't understand how anyone could be so reckless and angry. But the girl continued to pull her hands towards the ball, looking at it with a gambling look, ordering the guy to give her the object to move. And then, abruptly stretching out her hand, the devil's fingers brushed the ball, which cracked, and small fragments began to fall from it. Looking at the slightly battered ball and the flying shards, the demon lord and hero looked on in surprise as the ball continued to work and glow. Alto looked at the object in his hands with enthusiasm, and even though small fragments flew off, the guy hoped that the ball would continue to work. And so it happened. A bright glow lit up everything around them when the ball's action worked, and the couple was still able to teleport. The light from it was so strong that even the heroes above had to cover their eyes with their hands, and the swarm hanging on Ray and Just put its head down. After a couple of seconds, everything fell back into place. The demon lord's ruined castle was also left standing, and silence reigned around it. Ryan looked down in surprise and said that the she-devil and Alto had indeed disappeared. Dorothy, looking down carefully, looked distressed. Roy clutched his head angrily. He was madly displeased with the situation and very angry with Alto. Roy swore the word damn because that was the only way to describe what was happening. The heroes standing on the edge of the cliff tried to figure out what they should do now. But then, loud footsteps and shouts were heard calling out to the demon lord and asking if she was okay. The heroes suddenly became silent and alert, trying to find the source of the sound, and then turned around and froze in horror. Behind them, there were a huge number of monsters and demons that had slightly belatedly rushed over to rescue their overlord. They were completely different in size and appearance, but they were all very aggressive, knowing that their master was no longer there. Dorothy took up a fighting stance, pointing her staff at the monsters, and Rain was also ready to fight, but Roy just gritted his teeth in annoyance and looked at the monsters with a slightly surprised expression. V then also took out his weapon in the form of sharp blades when he heard Rayan's voice saying that they needed to get out of here. Dorothy, under Roy's watchful gaze, asked what would happen to Alto, but Ryan interrupted her, saying that right now they needed to think about how to fight off the enemy's attack. Angry and deeply resentful of Alto, Roy couldn't think of anything else but where his teleported friend was now. The destination is probably somewhere in the kingdom, so it shouldn't be too difficult to find it. He also wondered what they would report to the king. After all, the war with the demons had been going on for several years, and with their powerful bodies and overwhelming numbers, the human side was always the loser. But now it is in their power to change the course of events, preparing those very heroes to fight the demons. The one who defeats the demons will become a hero. But who would have thought that the main character who managed to defeat the demon lord would contact her? This doesn't even look like a joke, but like a real disaster. Fighting the demons with his blades, Roy took out his anger on them at Alto. How much more stupid was he going to do? After finishing off the demon, Roy looked up and shouted at the top of his voice, asking the empty air a silent question. Does Alto realize the consequences of his actions? Roy's scream was so loud that it could have been heard farther than the demon castle itself, but Alto would not have been able to answer Roy's questions. He was far away in the winter cold forest, where he was transported by the transformation ball. It was cold and quiet all around, and a soft, sparse snow was falling from the sky. The hero walked forward, still holding and carrying the disgruntled she-devil in his arms, not allowing her to escape. Both of them were extremely uncomfortable, and they couldn't even look into each other's eyes. The girl was looking sideways, and Alto's frightened and awkward gaze Alto's directed forward. After reaching a small cliff, the hero and demon lord in his arms had a mesmerizing view of the snow-capped mountains. She didn't know where they were. Alto also recalled his past, when he was a favorite and frequent guest as one of the best heroes at all important balls and meetings. The princess herself came up to him and awkwardly combed her hair behind her ear and suggested that Alto come to her room at night to spend time together. Alto didn't react at all when girls approached him, even if it was a princess, and continued to show an indifferent air. Then, glass in hand, Alto turned to the princess and gave her an interested look, asking why he was going to see her. The princess immediately blushed and hesitated, as a result of which she began to stutter and could not say anything sensible and intelligible. And then she ran away in embarrassment under the hero's gaze, saying that she didn't want anything and apologizing for the trouble. Alto shrugged and continued to drink his drink out of the glass when suddenly Ryan and Roy appeared on either side of him, giving him interested, amused glances. Ryan was surprised that Alto the princess herself had approached Alto, and he had embarrassed her. Roy added, smiling, that it was a big loss for Alto, but the hero did not react to their either praise or ridicule. He really didn't understand what the princess wanted from him. Surprised, Ryan said that Alto should have realized that the princess had been in love with him for a long time. Roy also added that a man and a woman should only do one thing, and that is to have a good time together. While Roy explained Alto the essence of love to Alto, the hero asked how they can be together if they have not known each other for so long. Dorothy was watching the whole conversation, but Altoshi didn't see the sparkle or amusement in Alto's eyes like the rest of the characters. Alto didn't understand feelings at all. Ryan smiled and let out a tired sigh as he looked at Alto, because it seemed useless to explain something about girls and high feelings to him. Alto continued to drink alcohol, ignoring the girls who wanted to meet him. Dorothy was surprised by the amount of alcohol consumed, as was Roy. Right now, though, Alto knew that love defied logic, and at the moment he was in a quandary because Alto didn't even know where they were, and the food and magic supplies were starting to run out, which made the situation hopeless. And yet, the hero felt that the fire of hope in him was only beginning to grow by the second. So he continued to carry the she-devil in his arms, hoping to get out before she called out to him. She'd been trying to tell him something all this time, but Alto had been in his own thoughts, so he hadn't heard her. But now she was finally able to bring him back to reality with her displeased voice. The girl asked how long the hero was going to carry her, and in a commanding tone said to quickly put her on the ground. But Alto wouldn't let her go on the excuse that she wasn't able to walk on her own yet, but the she-devil didn't like it as much as possible and tried to get out of his arms. But the annoying Alto didn't want to let her go and told her to wait until they found some place to hide. Then the girl stopped kicking, realizing that it was useless, and turning away, agreed to Alto's terms. He was very taken aback by this, and Alto blushed again, thrilled to realize that his beloved had listened to him. Continuing his long trek through the snow in a blizzard, Alto told the girl not to worry, as he would protect her no matter what. They found shelter in a cave and built a fire, trying to keep warm. Alto knew that he was living a happy time now, being with the person he loved. But he also knew that if things were going to continue like this, he would want to be closer to her today. And to do that, he had to do something, but he didn't know what. Alto. He had never talked so closely with girls about such topics, so this question put the guy in a dead end. And then Alto decided to talk to the girl and ask if she was cold or maybe she wanted him to do something. Then all you have to do is tell her. But the she-devil only casually and silently turned away, showing all her disinterest and bias in Alto. To himself, the hero thought that this was a very strange reaction to trying to talk to her and suggested that the she-devil was oppressed by her own role. Then it dawned on Alto that at times like this, you need to try to do something useful and pleasant. Then he put his hands together and said, "Letter Sher, Jesorichistunkar. Bileke Krut there dieter be light. Isnaivor nanidenokonaf." A small but very bright flash of light lit up in his hands, illuminating the entire cave. Then Alto awkwardly turned back to the she-devil, asking her how she felt and if it wasn't more fun to live when it was light. And then, trying to make a joke, he added that even in such a cave, you can live like in a city. But his attempts to speak still failed and passed by the still silent and sad she-devil. The atmosphere seemed to thicken around Alto, who seemed to be talking to himself, getting no answers and such a passive reaction. He didn't understand why the girl didn't react to anything, no matter how much he tried to get her to talk. Then the guy asked her how about some food, especially since he just found something. Then he took out a small twig that had a small roasted lizard skewered on it. And Alto, like a cat, began to court the scowling devil from all sides, saying that this is very nutritious food and it will definitely give her strength, and this appetizing lizard asks for its mouth. Nevashivist Alto's obsession was beginning to irritate her. There was too much of this stupid hero right now, and the last thing she wanted to do was listen to him. Then Alto decided to put the lizard in his own mouth, and even though he said that it was insanely delicious so as not to embarrass himself, but in fact it was just awful, as his expression said. The girl still didn't react at all, but Alto knew that he couldn't keep quiet right now and needed to continue the conversation. Then he decided to tell a story that he had just remembered. Once, two people got lost in the snowy mountains and managed to survive only by snuggling up to each other to keep warm. This is an amazing lesson on the importance of keeping your body warm. And then Alto decided to hint that there was an empty seat right next to him and the she-devil could take it, if she didn't mind, of course. But in response, the hero heard only silence, which has already been present in this cave several times in response to his stories and suggestions. And then Alto felt incredibly uncomfortable, as he only just realized what he had just said, finding it already too intrusive. And then he began to brush it off, saying that it was all just a joke, and he wasn't going to rush things. But then the unexpected happened. The she-devil crawled up to the hero and asked if it was all a joke, which confused him very much. He immediately blushed again, and his eyes were filled with embarrassment and fear as he didn't know what to do next. He was especially taken aback when the girl reached out to touch his chest. It was a shock to Alto because he couldn't figure out what was going on and what to do next. Defend or relax? He remembered the words of his friend Roy, who had told him something about how a girl and a guy should have fun together. But Alto had never done such a thing himself, and only a demon lord would do such a thing, just get so close to him. Or maybe everything should be so, and in general, it is in the order of things. Moreover, Alto subconsciously likes her insistence, but he was not able to overcome the embarrassment. Besides, he couldn't really think straight when there was such a beautiful demon lord right next to him, or even literally above him. In a flirtatious voice, she asked Alto why he should be ashamed of her, since he had invited her to sit next to him. And then she added that it was her first time being so close to a man, and asked Alto to be careful and gentle. The hero completely lost his mind when the devil suddenly began to use the power of magic absorption, grabbing the neck of the obviously not expecting this guy. He began to cry out in pain, and the realization that he was getting weaker by the second, as his energy was being transferred to the she-devil. She looked at Alto with sly and evil eyes, and then asked if he really thought that she would let him defeat her, and added that the hero had lost his vigilance. Shouting and looking at the she-devil with half-closed eyes, Alto asked her what she was doing. The girl gloatingly replied that with the help of his magic, she wanted to heal herself. And then Alto knew he had to do something before she sucked all his energy out of him and killed him. He reflected sadly that he thought the distance between them had decreased. The realization that he was wrong sobered him up. But the hero did not want to think about it, deciding for himself that it was clearly something more. But he couldn't afford to lose any more magic. His fist glowed with a bright light that blinded the she-devil. She realized that something was about to happen that could end badly for her. In the next instant, Alto used his beam of light, power, which sent the she-devil flying several meters away from him. The girl's back slammed into the cave wall, which cracked from the force of the impact. In the next instant, Alto was beginning to regret hurting her, but he couldn't say anything. But then, realizing what he had done, he began to apologize to the she-devil and ask if she was okay. Wiping away the blood that had appeared on the noob, the girl looked at him with an evil and sly look that said that she wanted to continue. She said that she was waiting for the chance to fight Alto again and ran into him trying to hit him. Alto dodged the blow, not understanding the actions of the she-devil, who was able to shatter the stone floor with her fist. Noticing this, the hero with fear in his eyes asked her to calm down, as he did not want to fight with someone for whom he felt strange and very pleasant feelings. But the she-devil continued to attack, and Alto parried blow after blow, not doing anything in response but only asking the girl to calmly talk to him and listen to him. But while delivering another powerful blow, the devil said that they had nothing to talk about and continued the attack, as a result of which the hero was thrown aside. But Alto stayed on his feet, keeping his balance as he skidded to a stop on the stone floor. The guy asked the girl to tell him at least the reason why she started fighting with him while the she-devil was creating a magic circle. Through it, she summoned her weapon, a huge black hammer with a burning glow, and with eyes filled with hatred, swung it at the hero. Her gaze grew colder and more aggressive, but it was clear that she was most eager to destroy Alto. Her hatred helped her find the strength to put it into her weapon, which glowed red as Alto watched, still confused and defensive Alto. He remembered the she-devil from the first time he fought her. It was a crushing and killing spirit with great might. It was only now that Alto felt the same energy from the she-devil as he had then, so it dawned on him that the girl was really trying to kill him. The hammer girl's next strike was so strong that the ice cave they were hiding in seemed to explode, leaving a lot of snow in its wake. Now the hero and the demon lord were fighting outside, and even Alto decided to draw his sword as he realized that he would have to defend himself. Their weapons intertwined and created energy that resisted each other. But she still wondered why Alto wasn't attacking her. Does he really think he's going to have a happy ending? At the moment, it was difficult to predict, as both opponents were strong enough to defeat each other. But Alto, who was defending himself from the attacks, suddenly shouted out that he had fallen in love with the demon lord, and therefore now he could not fight so as not to harm her. But the girl, still attacking, only laughed at him. Was she supposed to believe such nonsense? How can a hero love the main villain? Moreover, humans and demons are incompatible, and in the next second, the she-devil used the blood in the form of thorns to attack Alto again. The power was very strong, and the hero flew to the side, asking why the girl can't understand him. Единственное искреннее желание, Alto's only genuine desire is to be near the demon lord, and he doesn't care if she's human or demonic. After recovering from the attack, Alto stood up and asked the girl, can't they unite and not be enemies? After this sentence, there was an awkward silence on the battlefield, with only the demon lord's questioning and surprised face expressing bewilderment. She asked Alto again about wanting to join forces. It sounded too unrealistic, so it surprised her that the hero even thought about it. But Alto was as serious as possible, and he was looking at her with the same blank stare, trying to figure out why she was so opposed to the idea. But then the demon lord ironically asked, what Alto kind of hero is Alto? After all, not so long ago, the demons fought a big battle and almost won. But then suddenly, Alto, the strongest hero, appeared out of nowhere, and the human army gathered strength again and invaded the demon lands. Thus, it resulted in that very decisive battle in the capital, and it was all Alto's fault. Because of him, the demons couldn't win and suffered heavy losses. It was Alto who had killed so many of the girl's soldiers and caused so much damage to the army. Saddened by these words, the she-devil added, asking Alto if he knew how many demons hated him. At the moment, the exasperated devil demon lord is their only leader, so as long as Alto is a hero, they definitely won't be able to team up. After listening to the demon lord's confession, Alto stood shocked because for the first time, he looked at the situation not as a hero, but as a demon. Breaking the silence, Alto said with annoyance that it was all true and that he really had done a lot of bad things for the demons. Up until now, he had truly killed demons like a hero, and unfortunately, he couldn't change that now. But now, everything is completely different. Alto raised his head and said that he promised that he wouldn't do anything else good or bad that would harm the demons. The dumbfounded she-devil looked at him with great disbelief and bewilderment, and finally, grinning, tightened her grip on her hammer. And then she shouted out to the hero that she couldn't believe these words, which looked like complete nonsense. And the next second, right in front of the girl's eyes, Alto's shoulder begins to bleed profusely because no one could even notice how Alto decided to chop off his arm. The severed right arm flew into the air right above the battlefield, leaving the demon lord dumbfounded. And then the hand landed not far from the battling lord and hero, who were currently just looking at each other in disbelief. The she-devil couldn't utter a single word as she watched the scene and tried to rethink the hero's words. Alto, holding onto the bleeding wound, asked her if that would be enough proof. The master immediately started shouting at the hero and saying that he was crazy for taking such measures because he was a swordsman who cut off his own hand. But Alto didn't care. He silently and with a stony look held on to the hand, or rather its remnants, completely neutralizing himself as an opponent because a swordsman without a hand is almost incapable of anything on the battlefield. Then Alto looked up and said that for the first time he had discovered that he wanted to move on with his life. Even if he had to give up everything, he wasn't going to let go of that feeling in his heart. And then, holding out his bloody left hand to the girl, the hero smiled and good-naturedly suggested that she make up. Vladika's surprise was unmistakable, for just before her eyes, the hero was ready to cut off his hand and go to her dark side, just to be with her. This situation seemed to have turned into a picture and stopped in time. So surprised was the girl by Alto's action. Putting her hand to her face, Vladika seemed to be facing the biggest misunderstanding of her life. She couldn't understand what kind of situation this was. She felt sympathy from the main enemy, which was the last thing she wanted, because it was humiliating for her. And this feeling madly angered her. It was all she could do not to attack Alto again. Seeing such a reaction, the hero was also surprised because he expected that the girl, on the contrary, would react to his actions with more positive emotions. Tigda Alto then asked why the girl was angry, but the question made her even angrier. She didn't understand what else he was asking if Alto was the first person to beat her in a fight, and at this point, the end of their current battle didn't suit her. Then she grabbed the hero by the collar and almost threateningly told him that he had only one way to die. And this method she told him in an imperative mood, ordering him to return his hand to its place. And then next time, they will be able to accurately decide everything honestly, since it is disrespectful to fight with a wounded hero now. But when Alto regains his arm and recovers, he will definitely taste defeat and complain that he didn't finish off the Demon Lord first. He would drown in regret, burn in humiliation and despair when the Demon Lord defeated him. The she-devil added that Alto would die while she shredded his body and tore it off piece by piece. And that would be a fitting end for her nemesis. She certainly wouldn't agree to anything less. Surprised by the master's assertiveness and confidence, Alto looked at her, not with fear, but with bewilderment. They just stood there, giving each other completely different emotions right in the middle of a snow-covered field. Thinking about it, Alto wondered if this was the only way out. After all, if they remain enemies, they will not be able to change the relationship of their different races. But in the next instant, Alto decided that he would never give up and would do everything possible to do it. He didn't understand what the girl was thinking or why they had to go so far to fight. In any case, it's okay if she doesn't understand it, but if this is their fate, then they will decide everything with a fight as she wants. Then Alto replied that he understood the master and agreed to fight again in a fair fight. But if the hero wins, then the devil will have to come up with a way for people and demons to join forces and exist without wars. The girl made the most calm and understanding face, which spoke about the thoughts inside her head. But her inconspicuous smile revealed that she was clearly up to something. She wasn't a demon lord for nothing. Then she suddenly said that Jinnis should put everything on the line for each other. So if Alto wins, she'll give him her life too. Alto said that if he did, he would do the same, confident that it would be the same. He promised to fight with all his might, as a hero should, shaking hands with the she-devil as a sign of making a bet. After some time, the hero remembered the words spoken by the girl earlier, and decided to clarify something, although the devil herself did not remember at all that she had said anything. But Alto, blushing and embarrassed again, said he was referring to the same promise they'd made earlier, and said it was like a couple talking. The she-devil didn't appreciate his words at all, or even his attempt to win her over. It only made the atmosphere between them worse. The girl clenched her teeth, ready to tear him apart at the stupid words she heard. Grabbing the hero's cheeks with her hand and squeezing them hard, she started yelling at him for starting the topic again. But Altoit was as if he only liked her touch and couldn't think of anything else. The evil demon lord then added, squeezing the guy's face even harder, that he has an abnormal mindset that makes him fall in love with his enemy. Gathering the dark energy in her hand, the girl said that first, she wanted to beat Altoal the rot out of Alto. The hero, seeing a clot of dark energy, tensed again, but it was too late. The devil managed to do her job. She began channeling her power into the terrified Alto, who was about to ask her not to. But in the next instant, a loud shout rang out, resounding across a vast distance from behind the mountainous snow-covered area. It turned out that the she-devil only wanted to stop the bleeding from Alto's injured arm, which he obviously didn't expect. After bandaging his arm, he thanked the demon lord, but then awkwardly he told her to warn him in advance next time. The she-devil interrupted him and told Alto not to misunderstand her. This was all for the sake of fighting again later, and don't let Alto forget that this isn't the end of their relationship. She then asked in displeasure what should they do next. Alto replied that the blizzard was over, so they might be able to see something in the distance. As they approached the cliff, the demon lord and the hero began to peer into the distance, trying to see any signs of life. But then Alto broke the silence by saying that as far as he could tell, there was nothing but a snowy desert. Then the hero thought about what they should do next. Either way, they need to get out of here. Then an idea occurred to him, and he warned the she-devil that, in that case, an interesting adventure awaited them. Alto took out a slightly battered orb from his pocket, saying that it was the transfer item that the demon lord had destroyed. The hero said this with a hint of disapproval in his voice, and the she-devil immediately asked if Alto really wanted her to take responsibility for destroying the item, but the guy immediately said that this was not the case. Dorothy told him that if you put magic into the ball, you can use it again and again, and Alto and the Demon Lord were both geniuses of magic. Then the she-devil, passively joking, replied that it was true because the abilities of this teleportation item are a whole national treasure. Then the girl's face became awkward again, and she asked the hero if he would definitely not make her pay for this magic ball. Alto replied that, of course, this would not happen. The hero also added that he does not know where the item will teleport them, but it is worth activating it again. The she-devil agreed to this suggestion, saying that she was in business and touched the ball. In the next instant, they began to be filled with magic from the strong Demon Lord. It should have been enough to activate even a broken item, but the she-devil agreed to the gamble so quickly that Alto didn't even have time to figure out what was going on, shouting out that she was making decisions too quickly. But the girl, smiling, replied that you need to live fast and die young. This is her credo. Therefore, it lives by this principle. Alto thoughtfully replied that it definitely looked like a Demon Lord as the ball filled up and started to glow more and more. A huge flash of light illuminated the snow-covered mountains, and the energy of both characters was able to use the ball to transfer them to another place. Alto at that moment, Alto remembered the members of his loyal team who had become his friends and thought with regret that he would like to see them all again. Then he would like to tell them everything openly about the current relationship between him and the Demon Lord and his main goal, so that humans and demons can work hand in hand. The teleportation was completed successfully, and the hero and the Lord found themselves among the already familiar stone ruins. Looking around, Alto immediately realized that this place was definitely familiar to him, and he was not mistaken. Right behind him were his friends that he had just been thinking about, who were staring in shock at the fleeing Alto and the Demon Lord who had appeared out of nowhere. Looking at Dorothy, Roy, and Ryan, Alto realized that somehow they had been transported to the same place they had first teleported from. Surprised and elated by the unexpected circumstance, Alto said he didn't think they would meet so soon. When Alto saw his boys, he was pleased that they had so much to discuss, but he didn't have time to speak. Right next to Alto's eye, a purple blade suddenly appeared, aimed straight at the target and clearly looking menacing. It was Roy, angrily pointing the tip of his blade at a friend who clearly didn't expect this and didn't have time to defend himself. Roy's eyes were wild with anger. Turning to Alto, he asked his friend who he thought he was, coming back here with the Lord. Alto froze in surprise, startled and confused by the sight of his friend's sharp blade pointed at him. Everyone else was just as shocked as they watched Roy react aggressively to Alto's appearance. Ryan and Dorothy were the most worried, as they didn't even know who to support in this situation. At this point, Alto said quietly and guiltily that he had returned without telling his friends about his plans, so he sincerely apologized. But then his expression became confident and serious, after which the hero shouted out that, in any case, he did not regret anything. The words left Roy, already so aggressive about Alto's actions, Alto in complete shock. Roy swung his blade at his friend in anger, not understanding how he could not regret what he had done, but Alto was able to dodge the blow. The moment Alto realized that he had escaped injury, he asked Roy for a second apology and suggested that we talk first. At the same time, the hero saw Alto's hand, or rather what was left of it, a bandaged, severed limb. Roy stared at Alto in surprise and distraction, not sure whether to add anger, aggression, pity, or shock to his friend now. Dorothy and Ryan felt the same emotions, but less aggressive. Ryan when they saw Alto's hand. After a few seconds of silence, Dorothy pointed at Alto with her staff and cursed angrily, asking the hero why he was so naive. They also accused Alto of letting his guard down in front of the enemy and turned to the Demon Lord. Hearing this, Alto felt that there was a misunderstanding, because he definitely did not expect a trick from the Lord. It didn't happen, because the red-haired girl really just stood there and watched the whole time, not intending to do anything. The Demon Lord glanced at the two heroes who were staring at her and saw the disapproval in their eyes, but she immediately convinced them that they were wrong and that Alto had injured himself, and it wasn't her fault. But Roy couldn't believe it, shouting out that Alto can't do so many stupid things in one day, so they won't believe such a blatant lie. Dorothy watched in surprise until her eyes met those of Alto, who held up a hand to be noticed and then began to speak. He once again apologized for his reckless actions, but then awkwardly admitted that there was a very important reason. All the heroes turned in his direction, greatly surprised that they were trying to protect Alto, who honestly confesses that everything the Lord says is true. Then Alto told about his large-scale idea, from which surprised and loud exclamations spread through the ruins of the castle. Then everyone calmed down and began to think about everything that had happened, while Alto sat down on the rubble stones and Dorothy healed his injured arm. The power of the sorceress really helped, and the hand stopped aching and aching very much. Then Roy spoke up, impulsively saying that he didn't understand anything at all, and asked Alto what was going on between him and the master right now. But the guy just told his friend that it was a very long story, which angered Roy a little, who wanted to know the details. But Altoonly raised his head and added that, unfortunately, there was no progress in the love between him and the Demon Lord. Roy was about to run at Alto with his fists, wanting to hit him, but Ryan held his friend back, trying to coax him to calm down and telling him that he understood how Roy felt. Dorothy agreed to this, as Roy was also injured, but then Ryan asked that if Alto was ready to come back right now, that meant he was ready for something, right? Alto, still absorbing Dorothy's healing magic, confidently replied that he was really ready for this. Then Ryan said that they would first need to know whether Alto was on their side or the Master's. Alto shouted sharply and confidently that he was still on everyone's side. Then Ryan pointed a finger at the Demon Lord standing in the distance and asked what Alto thought of her. The girl reacted sharply to these words, innocently asking, do these three heroes really think that in such a composition you can cope with her? Her confidence and demeanor angered Roy, who started cursing loudly and was about to lash out at Vladica alone, but Dorothy told her friend to calm down as he was out of control. Then Roy turned to Alto and asked how he could fall in love with such a bitch. She's crazy, but Alto, blushing, said that he liked the bossy ones, saying it in such a sweet voice that flowers seemed to grow all around him. But then the Demon Lord spoke up, saying in a low voice that it wasn't because of her impudence. Dorothy then asked the girl D. if she could repair Alto's arm if she really wanted to heal him. But then Dorothy began to realize that Roy's insults had been directed at her as well, while she was trying to calm him down. And then she lashed out at Roy, aggressively asking and simultaneously claiming that he was talking about her. She didn't want to be rude, but right now she wanted to be. And Roy, continuing the skirmish, said that it wasn't his fault that it was also boiling fast. While the two friends were having a small argument, Alto suddenly realized that when he got his arm back, he would fight the Master again. But first, he must tell everyone about his complicated plan, as he promised to do so to the Demon Lord. Alto didn't think much about it. He was tormented by doubts and uncertainty in his words, or rather, in the reaction of his friends to these words. Alto started to speak, but before he could say a word, Dorothy interrupted him, saying that she couldn't do it. Alto looked at the girl next to him, surprised and uneasy, trying to figure out what she meant. But Dorothy hung her head guiltily and apologized, saying that she couldn't fix her arm. Roy and Ryan stared at her blankly, and Dorothy added that she wasn't an expert, so she didn't know much about it. It's probably because the wound is completely closed. Startled by her words, Alto asked if he should use a new hand instead of a restoration, or maybe you need more advanced regeneration magic. But Dorothy didn't say anything, so Alto asked about any other magical items that could save his hand, but the girl remained silent. Alto was afraid of this news and hopelessness, because if he did not heal his hand, he would not be able to fulfill his promise to the Master. He knew that, in other words, the arm couldn't be healed right now, but was there really no other way? Then, looking at all this, the Demon Lord decided to say something, offering her help. She called the hero, suggesting that he return to the castle, as items from the local treasury can help. But if they don't find anything, then otherwise Alto's friends might be looking for something too. Hearing this from the Demon Lord who offered to help the hero, Rayan and Roy were very surprised and didn't know how to take it. Then Alto said that there was nothing to be done, and went in the direction of the Lord under the questions of Roy, who tried to stop him and find out where he was going. Turning in his friend's direction, Alto yelled at Roy to just trust him. But this did not happen, and the evil swarm cut off Alto's path further with the help of his blade, which cut the ground with its power. Alto stopped and raised his head so that he wouldn't lose his balance and get caught by the blade. In the next second, Roy shouted out that he didn't know what had happened to Alto, but he had already damaged his trust, so now he was out of the question. Everything is now in chaos. Everyone who had fought them fled as if the royal army had been annihilated. That's why they're all on the run from their own people right now. Roy pointed the blade at Alto and asked him angrily once more if he understood the situation they were all in right now. Alto lowered his sad, thoughtful gaze to the ground, seriously analyzing the situation and Roy's words. But there were two scales in his mind, one of which clearly tipped the balance because it was the Demon Lord, his first love. For her sake, and Monpai lost his arm and created a new dream, wanting to unite with the demons, and he is not ready to give up on her. Alto, looking down at his severed hand, agreed with Roy's words, and added that it was also difficult for him to realize. After all, Alto really was a real hero, one of the strongest, so he can't escape from his mission. Roy wanted to interrupt him by asking why Alto was doing this, but the guy cut him off by continuing his monologue. It was then that Alto said that no matter what, he would not be able to return to the kingdom to continue fighting. After all, he had promised the Demon Lord that he would fight her again when he regained his arm. And if Alto wins, he will create a world where humans and demons will live side by side. And the guy really believed that it was this mission that he should complete as a hero. Hearing these words, which were a confession from Alto, Roy was even more shocked by his friend's behavior. The same spectrum of emotions was experienced by a surprised Dorothy, whose eyes widened, and Ryan, who couldn't say a word. Zatem, Alto then gathered his shocked team around him and asked if they would help him complete this mission. It was all very strange, but what they didn't realize was that they had been carefully watched all the time they were in the ruins of the castle. It was a statuesque and powerful demon with huge black wings and a thoughtful look expressed in yellow eyes. Looking at what was happening, he was surprised to see the Demon Lord. He hadn't expected to see her here, even in the company of heroes, but one thing he did know was that the Demon Lord was his favorite. At this time, there was a small argument going on between the Overlord, who was mocking Alto's idea and saying that the hero was talking as if he had already defeated her, and Alto, who was trying to justify himself. But also in those moments, Alto thought that he could definitely do what he was planning, because even though his connection to the master was distorted, he still felt it, so everything would be fine between them. The thought encouraged Alto, but at that time, he didn't know how fragile his hope was, and he didn't even know it, but he would soon find out for sure, because someone was approaching them. Sensing someone approaching, Alto turned around and immediately tensed, as he couldn't believe what he was seeing. A huge burst of power flew straight at the heroes, shattering the remains of the stone castle with its punch. Alto stayed on his feet, despite the sheer force of the blow, and immediately began to stare into the clouds of dust that had risen. Suddenly, Ryan emerged from the dust cloud. Ryan asked Alto if he was alright. The guy replied that everything was fine and asked if Ryan had seen the Lord, but then he noticed something he both wanted to see and wished he hadn't, and it left him shocked and numb. A guy, or perhaps another demon, was standing next to her, wrapping his arms around her and wrapping his black wings around her. The demon leaned toward the girl and gently apologized to her for coming down so abruptly and rudely, then asked if the master was hurt. Alto, who was standing a little further away, watched all this Alto and did not understand where this insolent demon came from. And then the hero disdainfully said that this very demon looks like one of the subordinates of the Demon Lord. Just then Swarm appeared behind Alto, holding their blades and telling him that this was the demon they were hunting. But then Roy added in a frightened voice that this demon was too strong at the moment, so he had to run before it was too late. But Alto immediately began to ask them all to stop because the master was also present, and Alto was very interested in what would happen next. So far, the situation looked calm, but it wasn't relaxing at all, as there were two of the most powerful figures from the demon world in front of the heroes. Then the Demon Lord amiably asked the demon, calling him Clovis, what is he doing here anyway? Clovis replied that they had received orders to pursue the remnants of the human army, and then he realized that the Overlord had suddenly disappeared. The girl replied, self-consciously explaining that there were unforeseen circumstances, and she had to fight for her life. Clovis, laughing, replied that it really looked like a Demon Lord. Watching all this cute conversation, Alto jealously noticed that the two of them got along well, so the hero had doubts that this demon was just her subordinate. And now Alto wondered what kind of relationship he had with the master. At that moment, the demon came too close to the girl. And then, saying that he was very glad that she was all right, he hugged Vladika tightly, as if he had been very worried about her before. Seeing this, Alto froze in place with a huge annoyance and a mute question on his face, trying not to take off from the spot. Turning to his friends, the hero asked them what it was just now, and then, laughing nervously, he wondered again if this wasn't beyond the realm of friendship. Looking at Alto's strange reaction, Roy, Ryan, and Dorothy all simultaneously thought that the hero was now completely lost. Dorothy tried to cheer Alto by suggesting that maybe this demon was the master's brother, but Ryan immediately rejected this suggestion, saying that they are not the least bit alike. Then Alto, who was still watching the demon he already hated, heard him apologize to the master for the outburst of feelings, saying that he simply could not cope with it. Scratching the back of her head, Vladika noticed sadly and matter-of-factly that Corvus always said that when something like this happened. Hearing this, Alto was even more surprised to realize that this wasn't the first time a demon had violated the Demon Lord's boundaries, but the girl herself reacts to this demon in a different way than to Alto. Doesn't this mean that they are more suitable for each other? These thoughts began to spin in Alto's head, making him more and more confused. In the end, he gritted his teeth in anger, feeling a new and strange feeling, and this was the first time he had ever experienced such a disgusting feeling. It was most likely jealousy for this statuesque demon that had appeared out of nowhere and immediately seemed to stick to the master. Then Alto felt a dark and powerful force approaching him, and he turned around at the now familiar, hated voice. Behind him was Clovis, who wanted to get this over with and return home with the master. He gathered a huge amount of power and used the heavy silent terrain ability, creating a bright purple sphere with a pattern on top. It lit up right above the surprised heroes and thus trapped them. One of them shouted for everyone to be careful as the demon's magic was too strong. Then the ground beneath the heroes' feet began to crack and fall apart, turning the stone floor into another ruin. Alto was stuck in one of the cracks, and couldn't get his right leg out of it, keeping Tolko's balance thanks to his sword and left hand resting on the floor. Then Clovis from the Demon Lord appeared next to Clovis, who wanted to stop him and asked him to wait. Then the girl added that she had a personal promise to the hero and asked Clovis not to kill him. Clovis looked at her with his yellow eyes, which expressed bewilderment. Clovis had asked the Lord about the strange promise. The girl clarified that in the name of the Demon Lord, she swore to fight this hero again when he recovers. Hearing the master's words, Alto blushed with a pleasant feeling and the realization that she remembered and thought about him and the promise they had made to each other. Then it dawned on Alto that whoever this strange demon next to her was, he had a connection with the master that only he had. Turning to the girl, Clovis asked her in a low voice, "Is she as selfish as before? After all, you need to understand that this hero is their enemy, so a promise made to an insignificant mortal cannot be taken seriously, because it even sounds ridiculous." Clovis added that this hero definitely didn't deserve this, and ignored the master's request and continued the spell. And then he added that instead of actions based on personal feelings, Vladika should have a broader vision and think more about his people. Isn't that the role of a master? The girl lowered her head in annoyance and even wanted to object to Clovis, but she didn't have time to say anything because Alto heard all the words Alto and didn't want to do nothing anymore. It stung him that the demon had said that he didn't deserve the master to fulfill her promise to him. With anger, Alto's power began to grow, and cursing, the hero clenched his teeth and said through them that the demon had no right to say such a thing to him. Clovis laughed and said, "Isn't that right?" Moreover, it is Clovis' duty to guide the overlord and protect her from foolish actions. Alto was outraged by these words, Alto, and then he asked the demon where he came from and who he was. Alto was still trying to fight the demon's energy by emitting light from himself as Clovis watched resentfully. The demon acknowledged that Alto's behavior was really rude, and then, adjusting his glove, noticed that he really hadn't introduced himself. Pointing to himself, the demon said that his name was Clovis, and that he was a general in the Demon Lord's army. He was also destined to take a place in the Lord's family from an early age, as it had long been decided that he was the fiance of the Demon Lord. For Alto, the news was truly shocking. At that moment, his fragile hopes for a future with the sovereign began to crumble. Out of frustration, he fell to the ground almost exhausted, having stopped struggling with Clovis' power. From the impact, his hand broke through the stone ground, which began to crack from the powerful fall. Alto was still trying to process what was happening, but all he could think of was the word groom. He repeated it again and again, lying motionless on the ground and looking at one point, limited in his movements by the power of Clovis, which hung over all the heroes. Then, rising to his feet, Alto turned to the master and asked if this was true. And if so, why didn't she tell him? Vladika calmly replied, why should she talk about it? Moreover, Alto hadn't asked her about it in the first place, and after a moment's thought, and then getting back on his feet, Alto agreed with the girl's words. He didn't really have the idea to ask her about her relationship. Then, clinging to his last hope, Alto shouted to the master if she liked this demon and if she really loved him. The evil lord replied that she didn't have to talk about her feelings with Alto because he was basically nothing to her. Then Alto interrupted the disgruntled girl and turned to her, begging her only for one thing, not to break his heart. The master stood in front of the exhausted and wounded Alto, not even suspecting what was going on in his head. But the girl understood that she was hurting the hero and, moreover, was not fulfilling her promise made in the name of the Demon Lord. Alto tried to raise his sword and fight, but the awareness of the situation and the thoughts inside him were killing the power inside Alto. He lowered his sword again, which struck the stone ground. All he could hear was Clovis's voice, telling the master that she already knew the answer, and the girl telling the demon not to laugh at her. Alto said, or rather asked himself, was it impossible in the first place? After all, he was a hero and an enemy of the Lord, and everything was clear even before the battle. So, Alto wanted to get as close to the master as possible. While doing all these crazy actions, he was desperately rushing forward. But now Alto realized that no matter what difficulties they might face, he would continue to move forward and not give up. And then Alto is sure that one day he will stand next to the master. But there is a small problem, and it consists in this most statuesque, powerful, and influential fiancé of the Lord, the demon Clovis. Because of him, Alto may never achieve what he wants, because the master may want to stay with him. The thought made Alto's skin crawl, and for a moment his eyes were blank and blank. The guy was thinking, what should he do now? But his thoughts were interrupted by a screaming swarm who told Alto to defend himself, and he had already created a magic shield. The demon used the power of falling stars, and a huge number of stones flew at the heroes. Then Alto, quickly getting his bearings, created a triple magic shield that stones could not penetrate. However, Alto's friends were not so lucky, and their magic shields could not withstand the power of the demon, which caused Roy, Dorothy, and Ryan to suffer greatly. The pressure of the rocks and their flow created what looked like an explosion, creating huge clouds of dust and rifts in the ground. After a couple of seconds, when everything calmed down, the dust began to settle gently on the cracked ground. Then it became clear that Clovis' blow could only be sustained by a standing Alto, while the other fallen heroes lay motionless on the ground. A huge force created a depression where the dehydrated bodies of Dorothy, Ryan, and Roy fell. Turning around, Alto shouted to all of them that his guys should respond because the hero was very afraid for his friends. Fortunately, they all survived and started trying to get up from the rubble and help Alto. Roy, who was propped up on his elbows, shouted out to Alto that they were all right and told the hero to focus on the enemy in front of him. At this time, the demon was already flying towards Alto, who was distracted by his friends, stretching out his hand in the direction of the hero. But the guy quickly noticed Clovis out of the corner of his eye. Not for nothing did he have one of the best reactions in the kingdom. At the same time, he turned around and, holding the sword in his left hand, parried the attack of the demon that attacked him with its weapon. Clovis was surprised by Alto's strength and asked how he managed to block his attack. Is Alto really a hero? Just then, there was a loud thud of a hammer hitting the ground, and the demon lord's voice rang out, calling for Clovis. Turning around, the demon saw the girl standing behind him with her wings outstretched and aggressive. The master shouted that she had already told Clovis to stop, and she was outraged that he couldn't listen to her. Seeing that the girl was protecting him, Alto shot her a worried and grateful look. Then Clovis whispered softly to himself that he was apologizing to the master and waved his hand to summon a new power. Summoning her, the demon said that for once, as a general, he couldn't back down, and then used an ability called Silent Gravity Bonds. Just then, a patterned circle of light appeared above the demon lord, which exuded a dark and powerful energy. In the listening second, the demon lord, who was not expecting an attack, was bound around the wrists by the power of Clovis and could no longer move normally. Glaring angrily at the demon, the girl asked aggressively and displeased, "What does he allow himself?" But Clovis calmly replied that he could not allow the master to interfere with him, and told her to calm down a little. After seeing what the demon had done to his beloved master, Alto struggled to come to his senses at first, growing more hateful and angry by the second. Looking at Clovis and then at the master, Alto experienced a new and frightening feeling. He began to worry a lot about the one he was in love with. Glaza Alto's eyes were burning with anger. And while looking at the demon, the hero told him that he thought Clovis would be friendly, but he dared to ignore the will of the demon lord herself, and then also took away her freedom. How dare the devil call himself her fiance after all this? With such aggression, Alto's power began to grow, surprising and scaring Clovis a little. And then in an instant, Alto delivered a powerful blow to the demon, accompanied by its powerful light energy, which threw the enemy to the side. But Clovis managed to stay on his feet, standing on his feet and rolling on the ground by inertia. After which, he leveled up and glared at the similarly aggressive hero opposite him. But Alto wasn't looking at the demon anymore. He was thinking about how he was feeling right now. He thought about the disgusting feeling that he had experienced for the first time today. Alto couldn't put it into words because there were all sorts of emotions swirling around the hero right now, and there was a mess in his heart, but he could understand one feeling clearly and clearly. Alto clenched his sword in his left fist, Alto, and aimed it at Clovis, his worst enemy at the moment. Opposite Alto was the demon he hated, who also confidently pointed his sword at the hero. Both of them took off in an instant and ran towards each other. Alto felt that same feeling stronger and stronger by the second. The hero knew one thing for sure. He didn't want to lose to the demon, and now, no matter what, he will try to defeat it. The two enemies' acid blades were once again locked in a heavy battle, where it was pointless to bet as the outcome was unknown. As he fought the demon and attacked it time after time, Alto wanted to put all his feelings into the battle. The demon dodged difficult attacks, but it was not so easy for him. Eventually, it braked and stopped for a moment. Clovis, assessing the strength of Alto, said that he definitely does not occupy the position of hero in vain, but there is one caveat. Did Alto think he could fight him with one hand and still fight him with his left? It was unthinkable, and Clovis attacked again. Alto defended and dodged attacks, but he also knew that even though he was giving it his all, he was still failing. Dragging his sharp sword on the ground, Clovis decided to hit Altobi, pushing the subject. After delivering another blow, the demon asked the defending Alto if he was really in love with his fiance, but the hero only looked at his opponent questioningly. Then I asked him how he knew that. Clovis replied that he had noticed it to some extent in the way the hero looked at the lord, but the demon had never imagined that an enemy of his people would do such a thing. But then, he wasn't really interested in it because the demon was confident in its strength stepping on the hero. After telling Alto that his senses would only make him stronger, Clovis activated a huge gravity sphere right above Alto. The hero immediately began to be pinned to the ground with such force that the stones under him began to crack and he began to fall under them. For more effect and ego boost, Clovis walked over to Alto, who was drowning in the ground Alto, and put his foot on his shoulder. And then, in a threatening voice, he said that destroying the pests that cling to his beautiful flower is part of the groom's daily life. However, in any case, no matter how hard this little man tried, he still wouldn't succeed. It was hilarious to Clovis, and Alto, hearing these humiliations, absorbed them like a sponge, nurturing hatred inside himself. She helped him pull himself together, and he swung the surprised demon's leg off his shoulder, saying that he could say anything. But Alto still couldn't get out, clinging to the surface with one hand. Clovis laughed at him and decided to help the hero, but not in an easy way. With his power, the demon decided to help the hero stand up, pulling him out of the ground and lifting him above himself with the help of the Force. And then the demon pushed Alto aside so that he fell to the stony ground with rapid speed. Then the boy realized that he couldn't move under the influence of the demon's power, and he had no choice but to try to stop him with words. But it didn't work. Clovis watched the fall of a hero as if it were the fall of heaven and hell, silently watching as another hero soon fell at his hands. Alto plummeted face first onto the hard ground with sharp rocks right in front of the demon. Looking at this, Roy, Dorothy, and Ryan, who were already more or less recovered Ryan, looked at the outcome of the battle in surprise, worried for each other. But Alto wasn't going to give up, trying to lift himself out of the hollow created by the force of his body hitting the ground. Clovis asked the hero if it was still not enough and began to activate his power once more, taking Alto and lifting him above him. Roy yelled at Alto, asking him what he was doing, and told him to answer the demon's questions so he wouldn't be so angry. But the blood spatter was already starting to fly in all directions as Clovis took action. He kept lifting the guy up in the air, throwing him over and over on the hard, broken ground. Roy yelled at Alto not to give up or lose in a place like this. As his face hit the sharp rocks again, Alto thought to himself that he understood and knew everything perfectly. But right now, he's defenseless and his sword won't be able to reach the towering Clovis at the moment. Gritting his teeth, Alto began to realize that he couldn't fight anymore. Every instinct and thought in his head told him to give up, but then a familiar voice came from afar. While Alto was up again, preparing for another fall, the demon lord asked the hero what he was doing. Turning his head, bloodied from the blows, Alto saw the girl for whom all this had begun. The demon lord, hanging in the air with her wrists bound, gritted her teeth and asked, "Did she make a mistake?" The girl shouted out that Alto was the only sworn enemy she had accepted, and no one else dared to defeat him. Then the girl added, asking if the loss of one arm had already broken Alto, "What difference does it make whether it exists or not?" After all, if the hero has already said that he can defeat her, the demon lord, and change the world, then let him show her his determination. It all happened instantly. Alto, suspended in midair, suddenly realized something important. His thoughts were interrupted by Clovis, who said with a smile that even he envied the hero's determination, but with such injuries, he would not survive. And then dropping Alto to the ground again, the demon added that the outcome was already decided, meaning that this hero would die at his hands. But then the demon's dark power began to dissipate a little, as the light rays of energy emanating from Alto began to permeate it Alto. He was able to break the demon's control over him, and after dispersing its power around him, emitting light energy, he got to his feet in front of his enemy. And even though it was not easy for the hero, he continued to stand and confidently look at the demon, surprised by his strength. All the while, Alto was having strange thoughts. He was thinking about the demon lord, because if he couldn't be near her, then there was no point in his actions. It really was like that. The hero was filled with love and was not ready to stop even before such difficulties. Thus his love for Vladika helped him survive. Evil Clovis, devouring Alto with a negative, contemptuous look, couldn't understand how this little man dared to resist him. Taking off as if reborn, Alto ran straight towards his enemy, already smiling and mocking him. He turned to Mr. Clovis, saying that he did not advise him to stand in the way of two lovers and pointing his sword at him. Jumping on the demon, Alto added that the demon lord has a very pretty face when she smiles. These words and actions, combined with a burst of energy, discouraged Clovis, who just stood there and watched. Alto's friends Alto, the other heroes, felt the same way when they heard his outspoken statement about the demon lord. But most of all, Vladika himself was in shock, looking at Alto with a bewildered and disdainful look. But the man couldn't stop and was rushing straight at Clovis, sending a beam of powerful light energy parallel to him. The demon wondered why his sword had suddenly become so heavy. However, Clovis couldn't do anything about it. Alto stood in front of the demon, ready to attack or deflect its attacks at any second. And then, looking confidently at the enemy, he said that it was his turn and rushed forward. Looking at Alto, the demon wondered what kind of stupid thing he was doing, but it was too late to guess. But Alto was not shy about his words and was ready to fight even though he had almost died recently. But even now, the hero, in the opinion of the demon lord, was talking some nonsense. Then the girl ironically asked, did Alto really beat off the last working part of his brain? Well, then Korn has just stekkerist arwi trex and turn. Dorothy, after hearing Alto's revelations about the demon lord, wondered with some annoyance why it was the demon lord who had received such treatment and not her. Roy had long since lost track of what was going on here, and Ryan shared his feelings, but it was like Alto was finally back on track and ready to fight demons again, even with just one hand. The enthusiastic hero said that he said everything in all seriousness, and in fact, he is not at all shy about his words, feelings, and compliments to Vladika. But Clovis, angry and rather tired Clovis, was already trying to finish off Alto, saying that there was no point in listening to him. Alto, in response, began to approach the demon, saying that then, with his permission, he would continue his monologue. After dealing a heavy blow to the enemy, Alto actually continued to compliment Vladika, saying that she was passionate and beautiful, with beautiful bright red eyes and hair. As he kicked again, the hero added that he was attracted to Vladika by her egoism and domineering nature. And then he threw another blow with his sword, and the weapons of the rivals crossed when Alto said that he was also delighted with her girlish behavior. Fending off attack after attack, Clovis couldn't understand why Alto was so strong, and where did he get this energy from? Moreover, the hero's strength increased after each phrase he threw out about the demon lord. Meanwhile, Alto continued to attack with his left hand, saying good things about the master, such as how good she smelled, as he personally saw. The image of the girl had been in Alto's mind all this time, Alto, and with each new blow, it gave him more strength. Chuckling, Alto added a final compliment about how beautiful the demon lord was in battle, and especially her graceful body. For the hero, it was like a real delicacy, but Roy and Ryan felt a wild Spanish shame frozen in place. Dorothy was also not happy with such revelations, calling Alto's actions and words altauter horror, and the hero himself like a maniac who was crazy about his victim. The demon lord herself was madly angry after hearing so much about herself from Alto, saying through gritted teeth that she would definitely kill him now. Most of all, Clovis did not like Clovisuthus, who already hated Alto for liking his fiance, calling the guy a jerk. Then he swung his sword straight at Alto, who was already ready to fend off another attack. Clovis decided to dispel Alto's thoughts by saying that the Lord's charms were definitely not feminine charms, and then he used magic to throw a huge stone at the hero. Etet Udar Alto didn't anticipate this blow, which sent him and the rock flying toward the stone wall, which collapsed after the guy hit it. Clovis continued by saying that the demon lord really has a noble figure that always keeps its perfect shape no matter how much dirt it collects after a fight. The girl has a strong heart, ready to stand at the front with her soldiers. She truly deserves to be a ruler who leads the people. Using the power of the Roaring Stone disaster, Clovis held up a huge number of large and small stones, saying that he had been standing next to the Lord since childhood, and then turned to Alto, saying that he hardly knew the girl before she became a lord. Tigda Alto then asked Clovis with interest to tell him about the times when the master was not yet won. Clovis remembered that once a girl came all covered in scars, and the reason for this was the desire to present a monster for his birthday, namely a small dragon. Pointing his sword at Alto, Clovis recalled another story about how he made homemade cookies that didn't taste good. But Vladika the girl, almost crying, ate it with a smile on her face and said that it was very tasty for her so as not to offend Clovis. Therefore, he has countless memories and time spent with her, which is definitely not the case with Alto, who began to fly huge stones. Smiling, the hero admitted that, to be honest, he really envies Clovis for this reason. But even so, Alto still won't stop thinking about his future with the master, because right now he's serious and determined to win the battle. Alto said that he also wanted to cook the girl something, so that when she tried it, she would also say that it was delicious for her. As he deflected every blow and smashed every boulder in front of him, Alto was inspired by his thoughts about the demon lord. He thought about their future and possible moments, that if he fell, she would pat him on the head and he would lie on her lap ready to spend the rest of his life on it. Hearing this, Clovis shouted out in surprise and annoyance, asking if this was really Alto's true wish. Alto. Clovis didn't understand who this hero was. Just a moment ago, he was a cripple with no magic power. Then it is amazing how the hero was able to survive after such an attack. Clovis didn't understand where Alto's power came from. The demon looked down on Alto's struggles, but eventually was able to see only a haze of dust formed from the shattered rocks. But when the dust settled, Alto appeared before Clovis without a single scratch from the attack, and said that he was endlessly overwhelmed with a desire to end the war for the sake of the demon lord. Then he asked the demon if he didn't want the same thing. But Clovis, hearing all this, only got angry and ordered Alto to shut up with almost no emotion on his face. Alto. The demon's aggression was also able to awaken the power in him, causing the stones under his feet to vibrate and crack. After a few moments, under Clovis' cursing, since Silver's cursing, these rocks and earth plates began to rise up under the force of gravity used by the evil demon. Ryan couldn't understand what had happened at first, but then Dorothy noticed that they were all being pulled up too, and that Roy was watching them with a scowl. A huge black ball appeared at the top, which attracted and sucked in all the stones and other objects that came to her, like a black hole. Seeing this magic, the terrified demon lord shouted that Clovis was using this power to clear out the entire area. This force was called a hypergravity jump, which sucked in everything Clovis directed it at, like a black hole Clovis. The demon said that he would marry the demon lord, thus fulfilling his duties and devote himself to the prosperity of the demon race. And this pathetic human hero is unable to understand it. Clovis told Alto that he would be swallowed up by infinite gravity and thus turn the hero to dust. A alta-huge black sphere was rushing towards Alto, ready to swallow him up forever, but the boy didn't even move in the face of danger. He only said quietly that he really would never be able to understand the demon and its desire, but there was one thing. The demon lord hadn't laughed once since Clovis had come here, and that was a big indicator for Alto. It made him realize that the girl wouldn't be happy with this demon. In the next instant, Alto used his maximum magic power release ability, which released a giant beam of energy directly at the target. Alto added that he was looking forward to the demon lord's sweet smile, which is why he's fighting. And then the hero used the power of Flash of Heavenly Light, which illuminated Clovis and the darkness created by Clovis, heading towards the black sphere. Svetovoy Luch Alto's light beam enveloped this sphere, creating a disk of light around it that began to contract harder and harder. In the end, there was a huge explosion, which released a large amount of energy, and everything around lit up with a bright flash.